Hi, this is 100 and 100, where we are reviewing 100 VR games in 100 days. Today we are looking at Angry Birds Isle of Pigs VR. Angry Birds Isle of Pigs VR is a really fun adaptation of the popular game Angry Birds that debuted on mobile devices several years ago. Except there is a lot more going on in this game than what you're used to with slingshotting Angry Birds at pigs that have stolen eggs from birds. In this game, you will be in the environment with the pigs and the birds, and you're able to see the level from different angles. Very different from the two-dimensional game that you are used to on a mobile device. In our VRGear game reviews, we like to cover as many aspects of the game as possible so you can make an informed decision before you try or buy one of these VR titles. We're going to start off with the getting up and running for Angry Birds Isle of Pigs VR. You can buy this game from the Steam store, the Oculus store, the PSVR store, or if you have the Viveport Infinity subscription, it is part of the subscription and you can just download that one for free or as part of the subscription payment that you make. The download file is about 400 megabytes, and if you're buying this game, it is $14.99 on any of the stores that it's available. The start of the game is very familiar to the mobile version of Angry Birds, and it's pretty self-explanatory that you will go through different levels inside of different phases and game locations, starting off on the island, on the beach. You'll be launching birds at pigs sitting on wooden and stone platforms, and eventually those platforms will be made of different material. You'll be given additional birds to fire that have additional capabilities, all while you try to reclaim the eggs that were stolen by the pigs. Angry Birds Isle of Pigs VR is a casual, quick play game that you can jump into and jump out of really quickly. It's not difficult to get up and running. It's not difficult to get back into the game and pick up where you left off. The levels are all bite-sized and you're able to get through them in relatively short amount of time. In fact, resetting the level is very easy and getting to the next level is automatically saved. So this is definitely a casual game that is really enjoyable to play, and coming back to this one is kind of a no-brainer. If you own it, you'll play it often. If you have it as part of the Viveport Infinity subscription, you'll be able to load it in and play it often as well. This is definitely a good game for people who are new to VR or younger players who are more familiar with the game from mobile devices. It is a very general audience friendly type of game. You'll play this game from the first-person perspective, but you won't see much of yourself as a player in the game. The only two things you see in the game is the slingshot that you'll be using and an arrow in the right hand, and that is how you will be firing the birds at the pigs. You grab the slingshot with the right hand and you pull back and release, and that's just about it. The trigger is all you really need to do that. You're able to look at the levels from different perspectives as you move from one side to the other, and the game walks you through that during the first few levels as sort of a in-game tutorial, but you'll play this game from that perspective. Unfortunately, in this game, unlike the augmented reality version that you find on mobile devices today, you can only choose from predetermined locations at different vantage points around the level. In the AR version, you're able to get down on the ground if you put the placement on the ground and look very close from any angle, whereas in VR, you're given 1, 2, or 3 different angles that you are limited to looking through as you're playing the game. The theme and story of this game is all along the same lines as the previous Angry Birds saga, and if you're familiar with those storylines on the other platforms, you'll be familiar with the storyline here. However, the VR version of this game doesn't really go into the storyline at all. It doesn't really give you backstory, it doesn't give you much context, but if you come to the game knowing the story, that won't matter to you very much. However, this game doesn't include much of that, and so if you aren't familiar with the backstory behind Angry Birds, you aren't going to get much out of the relationship or really have an understanding why the birds and the pigs are not getting along. But having said that, we know the story, and it is definitely a continuation of that same storyline, though probably further back in time before some of the more recent mobile titles and the advanced story of the pigs getting a little bit more aggressive and even getting their own game. The controls for this game are incredibly simple. There are really only two buttons that you'll need to use. The B button on the Valve index controllers that we're using will show you the context menu to reset the level or go to the main menu, and the trigger will allow you to hold the slingshot, stretch the band back, and release. The trigger also is used to select a different location that you're going to look from as you play the level. Other than that, there are no additional control inputs. You do need to align your slingshot with the part of the platform that you plan to shoot, but that alignment and the pull and release is essentially the only game control inputs you'll be doing no matter how many levels into the game you get. That is going to be your exclusive mode of controlling the game. And we like how simple that is, and it worked incredibly effective. The fortunate thing is you can see the path that your bird will travel as well. Some games have not incorporated that, and we wish they would. This is a simple, fun game, but it did something that was very important, showing the player where their projectile is going to fly. It's not as intuitive in VR as it is in the real world when you're firing objects, and so having that additional help is very welcome, and it makes gameplay a lot more approachable, and it allows you to progress predictably through the game. For music and sound, this game has a persistent soundtrack that's playing in the background, and it's that fun Angry Birds music that everyone has come to be familiar with. Whether you like it or not, that's another thing, but the game developers definitely incorporated custom music and sounds to this game, and it's a familiar, playful Angry Birds music that you are definitely going to recognize once you get into VR. As far as sound effects go, each one of the birds that has custom capabilities comes along with their own custom sounds, along with the abilities having their own sound as well. As you stretch the rubber band back on the slingshot, that does make a stretching sound, and as you release, you can hear the rubber band reverberating and the bird crashing into different objects. The sound effects aren't necessarily new to this game. They were probably ported over from the previous mobile games and then put into this one, but that's fine because it adds an element of familiarity to the game. But there's definitely been a lot of work done over the years to make the sound of each element in the game precise and consistent from one level to the next. For player movement, you'll play this game either sitting or standing, and as you change your perspective by moving from one vantage point to the other on each level, that will be the total extent of movement in this game. You are able to lean closer to the level if you feel like it will help you get a better look, but it doesn't necessarily give you that much of a different perspective. There was some leaning to the left or right when we're trying to align our slingshot with multiple items on the platform that we would like to destroy. And so there is some leaning that you need to do, and the game does allow you to do that to get a better vantage point. But the overall perspective that you're going to be playing from and the movement is going to be limited to the locations that are placed around the level as you're trying to knock down the platforms. For motion sickness, you will not experience motion sickness in this game at all. There is a small possibility that you would experience motion sickness when you're moving from one vantage point to the other, but this is extremely small. Movement is not really a part of the game from the player's perspective. The thing that will be moving are the birds as you shoot them, but your player movement is very, very limited. It's not happening very often, and as you play the game, you are completely stationary, and the only things that move are the flying birds toward the platform to knock them down. Otherwise, motion sickness is non-existent in this game, which is, again, a great reason for this to be a great first game for people who are new to VR. For environment and immersion, this game is very bite-sized, and you experience it in small chunks as you progress through. That can be great for casual gaming, but it's not necessarily the best thing if you're wanting to have this prolonged experience that gets you really immersed in an environment that is rich and full of different experiences. But this game wasn't necessarily designed for that. And the game developers didn't spend a lot of time bringing the Angry Birds story into this VR game either. As a result, this isn't a game that you will feel entirely immersed in. Having said that, what the game does get right are the responsiveness of the controls, the physics of the platforms as they are destroyed, and the puzzles that are in the game really get you engaged with each one of the levels, and you'll keep replaying and replaying until you get it right. The game has a lot of stickiness and replayability, even though it is experienced in a bite-sized and small chunks way. So this one's different. The immersion comes from the ability to come back again, not necessarily stay in the game to experience a long, involved storyline. Let's look at the overall scorecard for Angry Birds Isle of Pigs VR, starting with theme and story. This game is getting a slightly above average score for theme and story. We're giving this game a 6 out of 10. This has a lot to do with the Angry Birds saga is a story that a lot of people are familiar with, but not everybody. But this game doesn't really add anything to that story, and it doesn't come along with a storyline that a player can get involved with. As a result, the theme of angry birds flying at thieving pigs is not going to resonate with new players to this game who aren't familiar with the history, because this VR title does not include that story. So a 6 out of 10 for story and theme. For controls, we're giving this game a very high score of 8 out of 10. There is very little controller input, but the controller input that does exist is done very well, and it was done very responsively. And so as you play the game, you will be able to get the hang of the controls very first time you play, and you'll come back to the game and be able to play it again and again. So 8 out of 10 for controls. For music and sound, this game is getting a 7 out of 10. There is some room for improvement because the VR title doesn't seem to have anything new, and it doesn't really bring a unique leveraging of VR the way that Angry Birds could potentially do. This game does have great soundtrack that is familiar. It does have sound effects mapped to each one of the characters and the physics that each one of the birds is able to enact on the platform that they are destroying, but there is room for improvement here. So a 7 out of 10 for music and sound. For player movement, this game is getting a 7 out of 10. The player movement allowed you to move from different vantage points to get an angle at the platforms the pigs were hiding in. However, the AR version of Angry Birds allowed you to look at it from any angle, and if you physically didn't want to move, you can rotate the platform you're shooting at. In VR, that ability isn't there, and you're also not able to physically move there. As a result, your movement is limited when it shouldn't necessarily be limited. However, the movement that was built into the game is definitely helpful as you're trying to shoot the platform from different angles. So not perfect, pretty good, room for improvement, 7 out of 10 for player movement. For motion sickness, this game gets a near perfect score of 9 out of 10. You will not experience motion sickness in this game, and that makes it a really great game for younger audiences, for older audiences that are extra sensitive to motion sickness, and especially people who are new to VR who would be really turned off to the whole platform and the whole VR idea if they were put into a game that is going to make them motion sick right away. So this is a great game that is immersive in VR, and there's no motion sickness. Player movement is limited, so there's not a lot to learn, and the controls are very simple, and you can get up and running right away. So motion sickness gets a very high score of 9 out of 10 with a recommendation to have this one ready to go for newcomers to VR. For environment and immersion, we're giving this game a 7 out of 10. Each one of the levels is unique, and each one of the puzzles is also different from the previous one, and the game does get increasingly difficult as you move through it. However, because of the nature of the casual chunking of casual gameplay and the chunking of the different levels, there isn't a continuous experience, and that prevents you from being fully immersed in one continuous storyline. However, that's okay for a game like this. And the immersion comes from wanting to get back into the game and being able to easily get back into the game and pick up where you left off. So there's definitely room for improvement in the context of the level that you're playing. Although not everything in the level can be interacted with, that is something that would be nice to see, even though it's not part of gameplay. But the environment and the immersion was pretty good in this game, so a 7 out of 10. And now for the overall score for Angry Birds Isle of Pigs VR, we're giving this game a really good score of 7.3 out of 10. We really enjoyed playing this game. The physics were fun to follow. The controls were really easy to learn, and we didn't get sick at all. In fact, we could have played this thing all the way through, but there's other things we gotta cover. And so we really recommend this game. You can find this one as part of your Viveport Infinity subscription. It's $14.99 on all the other stores, and we think you should try this one out. This has been 100 in 100, where we are reviewing 100 VR games in 100 days. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and be sure to pay attention for a notification tomorrow when we release another VR game review. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.